Andrew, you've been designing applications within Canvas since the early 2000s. How have the design of applications changed in that time?
Applications used to be very much driven and based around forms. So there'd be pages and they'd be quite static. Nowadays it's all so much more interactive, and actually one of the biggest changes is the importance of dashboarding. So quite often nowadays the very first thing users will see is a dashboard showing the status of data or tasks in the system. And then the forms that would traditionally have led the system may well be on a second or third tier in terms of their navigation as they're going through.
Andrew, what is your philosophy around the design of this technology?
The philosophy has been to make it easy for 4 different groups of stakeholders throughout the process of developing the application. And if we go through it chronologically in the process, we begin with the IT manager who's involved with setting up the platform. Everything is incredibly easy to configure, incredibly easy to replicate, incredibly easy to deploy. We've made everything as simple and efficient as possible. The second role working through the process would be the developers. So we've put so much into the development environment, into the way that developers are interacting with the data sources, with the different components, into the reuse, into productivity tools within the platform. So we've made this process as rapid and as efficient as possible. And then the developer has a second role, which is in the ongoing support and maintenance of a project. Now we've put, again, a huge amount of time, thought and effort into making the platform really good at enabling them to do this cheaply and efficiently and quickly. The third role is information officers. So we're enabling them to achieve governance across their data and across their organization. So there's so many ways in terms of dashboards and logs that they can view to see who's accessing the data and who has access to the data. The fourth role is the end users of the applications. Encanvas creates apps that users want to use. There's so many components within the application. There are meaningful data visualizations, useful dashboards, there are wizards, there's email automation. All of these and many more go into producing apps that truly give users the productivity that they need.
How does Encanvas support the creation of a site structure?
Within an app fabric, one can have public and private spaces. So these differentiate what is viewable and accessible when a user is logged in versus when just somebody comes straight to the site anonymously. Some sites are purely public, some sites are purely private, some are a combination of both. Then within that, there's a tree hierarchy. So we structure things according to user groups, according to functional groups, and there are just a host of different ways that one can choose to lay out a particular app or app fabric, depending upon the general requirements for that particular case.
Is it possible to replicate some of the structures that I've created for a different application?
Absolutely, and by design, very importantly so. And it follows our concept throughout of this ability to template or extract or reuse components and have them appear in other app fabrics, but then very much integrated to the other app fabric where they are then used.
What type of elements can you contain within a site structure?
The most common element is the canvas. That is one of the fundamental building blocks. But then one can sit that side by side with completely custom HTML. One can have areas of the site where things are tiled, so you can have many different canvases or HTML elements all open at once and visible in different regions of the page for the viewer. That's something that's very useful in navigation. One can have groups. All of these sorts of different elements can be hosted within the tree hierarchy of an app.
Where do sections fit within that site structure?
Normally they'll exist as different pages within the particular canvas. So if there's a very focused piece of an app, then it may be that you're moving between the sections as you, for instance, processing data, viewing data, maybe it's taking you through a wizard process. But then there are other times when a lot of the site will only ever be a canvas with a single section because the focus there is more on canvases side by side. So the split between the canvases and the sections basically comes down to a canvas being a functional block, and if that functional block requires separate pages or separate views or separate stages, then those we implement as different sections within the canvas.
So if I'm a company and I've already got a website, Can I embrace those style principles into what I do within Canvas, and how would I do that?
Absolutely, yes. And that has been what we were aiming for right from the start, because we've always wanted these to be led by the business requirements. And if the business requirements includes that an app looks a certain way, especially if it's an app that's then going to be used by their end clients, it really does need to conform to their branding. This is something that we've not only made possible, but we've made as easy as we could. So it's all just click configurable. There's no sort of settings files that need to be edited or anything like that. It's all done through the UI, and you can customize the app fabric independent from the business logic that's been put into place in the canvases, which is one thing that makes it so easy to reuse canvases as building blocks across app fabrics. And another thing is that any given single component or group of components can be exported as a template. So these can then be reused wherever one wants to use that same functionality again. Buttons are very important within an app and within a canvas because they have a huge amount of functionality built into them, and it allows us to let the users trigger or perform actions. So these actions range from the very basics, such as adding data, updating data within a data source, all the way through to workflows such as emails, generating exports and downloads or reports, and then on to other things such as conditionally processing data, updating, many different actions that can be stacked into a chain within a button and then executed conditionally. Also, users can click buttons, but also you can have invisible buttons whereby we allow for automated functionality within an app or within a canvas. So again, you can do some quite complicated processing based upon actions, but that aren't necessarily directly triggered by a user choosing to click on a particular button.
Do buttons always have to look like a button?
They don't. We have three different types of button. There's button, which is the sort of standard browser button. Then there's a text button, which is where it looks like text, maybe underlined, classic sort of link, because one can use buttons for navigation as well, but then of course for functionality as well. Or then image buttons, so you can have whatever image you want. You can have different states, so if you wanted to, you could have a standard, then a mouse over, then a when the mouse is depressed state, but that's very much up to you, and it depends upon how one wants a particular canvas or indeed a particular button to look.
The numerics being used in Encanvas, they're very different to the sorts of formulas or at least the structures that you tend to use in a spreadsheet. What was the logic behind the design of the numerics module?
The purpose for the numerics is slightly different to that from the spreadsheet because we're dealing with data in the data source, and often a lot of the sort of those calculations and things are done in the data source. In fact, that's where we want them because it's speedy, it's reliable. That is what data sources are built for in many cases. So the numeric in the canvas is built to more about reporting and displaying figures, being able to capture obviously user input when it is numeric, and then also being able to do calculations between the numerics rather than just the broad mass numerics of a data source, which we have left deliberately through choice. We've left that to the data source.
Email workflows can be generated from several different places within the platform. There are those that are launched from a particular user action, so that would be on a button. So you might be performing something and then sending the email notification, or you may well be using the email as some step in the workflow, the business process involved. But then also we can generate emails as a follow-up to many of the different automatic actions through the information flow service and designer. So that's where things are happening automatically or in a response to some sort of condition or maybe the data changing in a data source, and then the emails are being generated through those information flows to then continue that business process accordingly.
Is email workflow a design element?
Email workflow is the use of design elements and combination thereof, along with, if necessary, the automatic processes available through the information flow designer. It basically starts with the email button action, which is where it can be triggered, or indeed with the triggering of an email through one of the automatic information flows.
If I'm a systems administrator, do I get the ability to configure my notifications and escalations with email?
It allows you to customize the escalation, the recording, logging, all of these meta data around the email process workflow. So for instance, it can record the fact that the email was sent and timestamp that. Then you can escalate that if a particular action isn't taken or recorded or seen in the system, within a certain time period. But then also you can go through approval processes, and you can have escalations set in. It very much depends upon how you want to configure it and build it within a particular app.
And visualizations. How does Encanvas support location-based data in its applications?
Encanvas deals with GIS data in a variety of ways. It has its own built-in GIS so that it can use things like OpenStreetMap if one wants to, that, for instance, is license-free. Or it can use third-party mapping, such as the ones provided by the big major internet providers. So there are two separate design elements which both relate to geospatial data within the platform.
And why does Encanvas have its own GIS design element?
Speed, efficiency, and cost. So obviously there's no additional cost when using that element. The other thing is, because it is built right into the core of the platform, it's very fast, very efficient, and very neat. And we often use that when we're looking to display potentially huge data sets, tens of thousands sometimes of records all at once on a visualization. Building our own GIS component has brought a lot of advantages. For instance, there's the fact that we have complete control over the appearance. We can customize it, we can theme all the colors, we can use whatever pin we want in any given app. Then another thing is that it keeps the data in-house, so the data never leaves the platform, and also the way that we can then deal with, for instance, legacy data. In some old formats, often we'll get base or underlying data in old formats. Having our own GIS control then allows us to import and use these legacy layers just in and amongst seamlessly with the actual live data from the database.
Andrew, I've heard it said before that sometimes 60% of an application development can be software integrations, testing, tuning. How does Encanvas help to reduce those overheads?
Encanvas reduces those overheads by just so limiting the portion that does actually need to be tested in the first place. You've got so much around the security, the data sources that are there already and supported by the platform. So what it means is that for any given application that's being developed, the piece that requires testing is purely that functional core that has been developed for that specific application. So, and that testing is equivalent to the user acceptance testing, effectively, where you're validating more the thought processes and the logic that the application is producing versus any technical testing around specifics of a data source or security or anything like that. All of that is taken care of. It's just that core functionality of an app that needs to be reviewed.
How does that help the reliability of the code?
Effectively, it means that any given app can almost be codeless. So it's not that there's any issues with the reliability. All it is it's more a case of, I'm actually showing the wrong column from the database. It's that kind of mistake being made. It's not, our code isn't working in this way or that way. The problems that you encounter are just very basic and very fundamental. And it's more about how the application is working rather than any specific detailed code that needs to be reviewed.
Now, help files can be quite challenging to create as a developer. How does Encanvas support the production of the help files to support an application?
We tend to find that the best way of presenting help to users is integrated within the application. So rather than having to go off and search through manuals, the help is there in the page as they're looking at it and where they need it. It can be highly contextual. So to do that, then, as we're developing an app, we're building help into the canvases. And we have various templated structures that we can use to make this a very quick and easy task.
And another topic, Andrew, that comes up a lot is documentation. Many of these applications can get complicated with their processes. How do you record documentation within Encanvas?
This is something we think is very important, both in terms of when developers at a later stage come back to work they've done before, but also crucially in terms of documenting the application to the client. Very, very important. And there are tools within the platform that help us to do that as we're going through developing a canvas or an app.
How does Encanvas control the quality of data input into the applications being created?
There are several ways that we do this. The one is around validation and ensuring that if text is entered into a box, it's in the correct format, it's there in the first place. Then another is by extensive use of drop-downs. So because of the data structures and how easy it is to access and link to them from the canvas, we'll often use lookup tables. So rather than, for instance, typing in a company name, one would rather have a central table of company names, and then you're allowing users to maybe search and pick or select from a drop-down. These are the sorts of things that really mean that the data, when it's in the database, is as it ought to be, rather than being messy or free text, unvalidated, all of the pitfalls that we try to avoid in creating an app that then captures data.
Andrew, what does customization mean to you as the architect of Encanvas?
I think there are some very important ways that the platform or any given app can be customized. Let's start by looking at functional customization. We can do that internally or externally to the application. So in terms of internal customization, one can use one's own custom developed code, libraries, anything like this, as design elements, data sources. So one can, within the application, bring in your own completely custom arbitrary functionality. But then also externally, so we can use external systems either as data sources, or we can embed an app within an external system, or we can, for instance, even pass data out of the app to an external system or function and then import it back in. So we can achieve customization externally that way. And then another type of customization is in appearance. So we can customize anything to do with the appearance and the layout and the formatting of an app to really make it fit the particular company's branding or what is wanted to be achieved with that particular app.
Andrew, is there anything else that Encanvas does to speed up the time to value for prototyping?
The Encanvas Cloud Platform is providing the vast majority of the infrastructure required for the app, and the focus is just on the features and the functionality that are required. Because so much is taken care of, everything from the security, the data sources, the app fabric structure, what it means is that the prototyping, which is spent on the main core functionality of the app, is 100% of the task at hand. So once you've completed that, your app then is in a deployable, marketable state right from the word go.